Good morning and welcome to this Agile Solutions in Informatica webinar entitled Digital Transformation, a Data Management Culture. Just before we start, I just wanted to kind of recap a little bit of the fact this is now the fourth in a series of webinars and roundtables that Agile Solutions and Informatica have been running together. Part of the reason for doing this is really to enable us to start to develop some ideas around what we call the data management culture, which we'll come back to in a second, but also to kind of share those ideas and share experiences with the organizations as they move forward in the digital transformation journey. If we think about the topic for today, one of the key things that's underpinned all of the conversations we've been having, whether it be around data strategy or data governance or the world of processing today around architecture and technology, it's really around helping organizations not just transform in terms of the outcomes of digital transformation, but help them survive in the new economies and, of course, thrive, which is clearly where everybody wants to be. Before we kick off, let's just have a quick introduction. So my name's Andy Joss. I'm head of data governance for Informatica. I cover Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. And Mel, introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Mel Parker, and I'm a principal consultant for Agile Solutions, and I cover data strategy and data governance community.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's have a little bit of a look and a little bit of a recap on kind of how we got to this point. One of the things that we've been noticing as we talk to organizations, big or small, regulated, non-regulated, all different sizes and shapes, is actually this idea of a digital transformation roadmap. And really, we think there's some key core components to that. Really, part of the whole view of what the roadmap needs to look like, and particularly where it starts, is that relationship then to the business model, or why organizations are doing digital transformation. There's a strong link then to the data strategy, which is what the organizations are going to do around data. Then there's obviously a very strong link to the data organization, which is how they're going to deliver it. So today we're going to focus a little bit on the how, which is really around the architecture and the technology that underpins a lot of the capabilities that we've been talking about throughout the previous webinars and roundtables. Just as a little bit of a recap, one of the things that we're seeing quite frequently is that the outcomes from digital transformation can really be quite varied. And it depends on what an organization is trying to achieve, where they've come from and really where they're trying to get to. Some organizations, it's relatively straightforward, maybe moving away from manual paper-based processing to automated and software-based systems. For some, it's a lot more sophisticated than that. Some are looking at fundamentally changing the relationship they have with customers and suppliers, really to change their value proposition in the marketplace. Point being, though, is it doesn't really matter what your digital transformation outcomes need to be. Putting data at the heart of this, we think, is extremely important, and therefore having the right capabilities in place, aligned to the strategy which aligns to the business model, is a key way of ensuring that outcome that you're looking for is going to be achievable. If we look across different types of industries, actually, there's maybe a generic way of looking at the outcome of digital transformation. This is our one generic view of that, the idea of adapting to be more targeted and focused on meeting the needs of modern customers. And we know that the needs of customers have changed and are continuing to change. And at the same time, organizations are looking at trying to be more operationally efficient. That old adage of doing more with less is probably still true for many organizations. One of the things we've also noticed is that this idea of digital transformation, particularly when it's data-driven, is really changing from the way that we used to look at things. We used to look at the world where the process drove the data. And you can see on the picture here, we have various steps of the process, and they're basically using and consuming data really just to drive the process. What I think we're seeing and have seen in some really good examples is that we've changed. The world has changed, organizations have changed, and now data is driving the process. Data has become so fundamental to the transformation for many organizations that organizations have realized that the existing model they have is really something that needs to move into a newer generation of architecture and capability, really to support their needs going forward. But actually, lots of organizations have got a data culture. So are they in good shape for digital transformation? And by data culture, that's probably just around collecting data in whatever way they see fit and for whatever reasons they sit for. Actually, what I would argue is that what's missing is a data management culture. So the question would be, okay, so what is it? We're going to come back to that in a second. But actually, why do organizations need a data management culture? I think fundamentally it's quite simple. If data is that strategically important for the future of the business, then like any asset, data doesn't look after itself. And some very fundamental things, data doesn't magically do what people need it to do without data maintenance and data care. It might seem obvious, but actually for many organizations, this is one of the biggest challenges. It's not just about collecting data, but also maintaining it and making sure it's kept in a valuable state. So what this is meaning is really a change in data emphasis. And we can see here on the screen a few examples of what we mean by a data culture. So it's about, do we understand the need for data? Or how good are we at collecting data? Do we understand the scope? If it doesn't exist, how do we create it? And we think things look right. In a data management culture, that change in data emphasis actually says we need to think bigger, broader, and more holistically about the need for data and the use of data. So, for example, the change of the functional use of data, actually now in a data management culture, it's about an organizational need for data, not just my need, but our need. It's about understanding collecting data from the right place, not just from a convenient place. It's about understanding what data means in an organizational concept, not just in a limited business unit concept. And simple things like, this looks like the right data. Well, actually, what businesses need is to understand this is the right data, or potentially this is not. It clearly means that we can make better decisions off the back of all of this. So data management culture, we think, is fundamental to helping organizations deliver on that dream of digital transformation. Throughout the series of webinars and roundtables, we've been looking at this from a number of different aspects. The first one we looked at was around data strategy and collaboration. As we started right at the top of this is fundamental for organizations to understand how the data strategy supports the business and the business model, and how we get the organization working together around data and analytics. The second part of that then was around data governance, about how we're going to ensure that we have a good understanding and data context for all the data which our business is now relying upon. We then think about how this connects to the business and how business is going to use and consume this data, particularly from a process viewpoint. And then finally, and the focus of today, is what sort of architecture and technology considerations and capabilities do we need to think about to help underpin all of these different categories. If you want to see the other webinars, you'll be able to find those from the Agile Solutions website, or if you do a search on the internet, I'm sure they'll come up pretty quickly. And you can go back and see all the different conversations we've had up to this point. Probably one area we just needed to talk about is some attributes of what we talked about with this data management culture. There's potentially quite a lot of them, and we've been through a number of these across the various webinars, so we're not going to go into all of the details on all of these again. You can find a lot of the details in the previous webinars. But it's really to say, if you think about the right-hand side, there are some fundamental capabilities that we need to have in place that really starts to help make this vision of digital transformation and this dream of the outcomes of transformation really achievable and deliverable. But let's look at some of the challenges, and let's think about how we kind of got to this point, if you like. And now I think back to when I started in the IT industry, which is 30 years ago. The world was a much simpler, less complicated place. We had a relatively small number of organizations who dominated different parts of our industry. And over different periods of time, it's obviously flexed and changed as to who was doing what, where, and when. One of the things that we've noticed really in the last 10 to 15 years is actually the amount of technology transformation has been absolutely massive. We've got massive new players who've suddenly gone from being small niche organizations to suddenly massive players in the marketplace. They're taking massive amounts of market share, really changing people's views about how things are supposed to be done. So this has been great because it's given us a whole new way of doing things. It's driven some great capabilities such as self-service, and obviously giving us insights and data that we just never had before, and actually being able to use them in ways that we've never been able to do before. That technology transformation, though, has kind of been really capped off in the last couple of years with the introduction of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, that's not just the technology that people then use to kind of deliver value. If you're in a data science team or advanced analytics team, it's not just that technology, but how that technology is being embedded into other capabilities across the landscape and across the technology stack to help really drive value. So it's not just the consumption of these technologies, it's also how they're included in the technology landscape as well. And for many of you on the call, I'm sure a lot of these technologies are probably already in your organization and hopefully getting value from them too. If we then think about what this means, though, then actually think about this from a disruption viewpoint. With all of this technology change going on, let's think about kind of those new customers that we touched on earlier about the needs for digital transformation. We've actually got some disruptors here. We've got disruptors around data, which is we've got more data than we've ever had. It's growing at an exponential rate. Its complexity is just hard to handle. We've now got latency considerations, which is if we want to do things like real-time offers, do we need to work in a real-time way? And does everything need to work in a real-time way, plus obviously in the typical batch world that we worked in? We've also got new users. So let's go back to GDPR, for example. We had lots of data privacy officers and privacy people, most of whom had a legal background, not data professionals, but a materially important role in what's going on in the world of data. So we've got new users. We've got regulations, GDPR being one, but there's many others as well. And of course, organizations who are now shifting to the cloud. And in many cases, they're shifting to multiple clouds. So there's a lot going on that's really disrupting what organizations are trying to do. The way that we've been viewing that at Informatica is actually to think about how we can apply data management accelerators to all of this disruption to help really drive the value out of all this technology transformation. And some of the accelerators we'll touch on during a little bit of the rest of the presentation, but things around modern integration patterns, the use and incorporation of metadata, building AI machine learning into the technology stack, embedding governance into everything we do, and of course working in a hybrid world. And that's not just necessarily working in traditional on-premise or traditional cloud, but in multi-cloud and everything from ground to cloud as well. So that's kind of a focus of what we've been doing. But I'm just going to ask Mel now to pick up on some of the capabilities we're seeing organizations are looking at in that broader context.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So what we're really starting to see is a lot of our customers looking horizontally across that landscape and the ecosystem, as you said before, about exactly what it is that they need. So is it being driven from a governance aspect? Is it being driven from the ability to look at costs of data storage? What are we actually trying to achieve with what we're using already? Is there a migration to the cloud, as you say? So it's definitely about that idea of data strategy running alongside in parallel with a sort of more technical based strategy around what they're trying to do over a period of time. So clearly there's a lot of legacy in there as well, but I think we're now starting to see those more service based operations coming to the fore. So really, from my point of view, it's not so much that this is a technical architecture, it's more reference architecture of some of the capabilities that we're looking at. So hopefully that you can glean from this that data governance is clearly quite prominent at the top, and the operational data management activity is sort of towards the bottom. But ideally, what we can see here in the middle is a lot of different sort of aspects of what we mean by capabilities, rather than actual products that say, how do we establish what it is that we need to do? How do we manage and maintain that? And more importantly, when change happens throughout the organisation, how do we make sure that we can monitor and remediate any action upon that data to then go into the reporting or any escalation routes that we have? So you've got your data lineage, your traceability there, you've got processes and workflow that you've talked about, you've got to accommodate for new roles and responsibilities, and whether this is then inbuilt into process automation as well, which then really helps you to have a full data governance organisation rather than a niche silo within one particular business unit. So it's about that whole span of lineage, auditability, traceability, and managing that data from an end-to-end point of view.
Cool. So just take us through the colour scheme for a second, just so that we're clear on what the different colours represent.
Sure. So for me, the sort of amber colours are all talking about your sort of data governance platform, and this is really where you'll have your sort of glossary items, your data definitions, some data cataloging in this as well. We're also looking at your metadata lineage across that as well. So this is how we actually structure the data of how you want to do that. In terms of the dark orange boxes, this is more really into the depths of sort of what kind of data discovery have we got, can we find the data, can we actually put any sort of context around that, and how do we get into some of the more fundamental technical rules with that as well. The greeny boxes are touching upon data quality management, looking at data quality profiling, defect resolution, and some of the other boxes may touch upon using a hybrid of multiple capabilities to do certain things. So notwithstanding, you've still got the issue of how we handle reference data management that's covered in previous webinars, and also master data management, and of course following through with the overall governance stewardship, not just for data that we know, but harnessing the master data that's capitalised across the organisation as well.
Yeah. So I just wanted to pick up on one thing. So we talked a little bit about this in the last webinar, but this idea of what you call issue resolution and workflow management. I don't know about you, but I I see that as something which I think is becoming increasingly recognised as a route to give organisations the empowerment that if things aren't right, if things they need fixing, they know what to do, they know who to go to and how to make it work. Is that kind of consistent with what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think this plays part into the wider data management culture and transformational piece, which is shoving as well, making sure that we can push it out into the organisation and make sure that people understand that it's mostly self-serve, it's as real time as we can make it. It's device friendly, that people can really understand what they need to do with the data, how to fix it and who to go to, within a fairly simple workflow management solution that helps them do that without going to traditional IT departments that then have to put it in a backlog, but then have to fix the data, and all of that stuff takes time and operational cost, doesn't it? So
absolutely.
Yeah,
okay, cool, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of just keeping it simple, really, when people talk about the end-to-end capability architecture, from us at Agile Solutions and indeed at Informatica, we're really looking at this from a point of view of left to right, looking at how we actually source the data, so data ingestion, all the way through to the data management, governance and storage platforms, and then right through to data exploitation. So you both have business intelligence and analytics on the end, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but more fundamentally it's about the middle part. What is your data management platform that you're really going to have to think about, and how we're going to design that in terms of bringing together and leveraging the capabilities that we need.
So I guess you spend a lot of time with organisations who are on this journey, Mel. My sense is that many of them spend a lot of time focused on the right-hand side.
Absolutely.
And potentially spending a lot of their budget focused on the right-hand side. I mean, what's the importance then of these earlier stages in terms of the value and success of some of these projects?
Well, what we see is that if organisations are embarking on big data science projects, etc., it's really what you're feeding that engine, isn't it? So how can you get optimal results if you're looking at data that hasn't gone through a data quality exercise, or it hasn't been governed in the right way, or there's multitudes of duplication, etc., etc. So what we're trying to encourage as we go through this now is making sure that the end-to-end, so the ability to really source your data effectively and apply those rules, ensure that we're mastering those core data elements that are actually necessary for the business, notwithstanding the regulation and security models as well, but making sure that those are tip-top condition before we even start doing the analytics as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. Thank you.
So in terms of analytics architecture, this isn't fundamentally to do on the Informatica platform per se, but it is to look at what are some of the capabilities that we're looking at for that BI and data discovery piece. So as you can see from the technical transformational slide here, we can have, these are just examples really, but Tableau, Power BI and Kibana, just some of the new areas that we can see how people are exploiting this data in the market. We've got traditional data discovery tools in there, such as Click. You've got Cognos, SAP, and MicroStrategy as well. But really, this is to do with the fact that most of these things, if we can structure the data properly and have that data management platform, then these capabilities should really just sit on top.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. So I guess we're going to shift a little bit of a focus then, and then today is really about architecture and technology. So let's have a little bit of a look at the data management architecture, that kind of core piece that you've just talked about in the middle, Mel.
Yeah.
I think really, if you want to kind of get a bit of a focus on this, then actually we're probably really talking about an end-to-end data management for analytics as a way many organisations would probably think about putting this together. Now, I would argue you can use this data management for anything, not just analytics. So this is probably a really easy way for people to kind of get a sense as to how it's all put together. Now, this is Informatica's end-to-end data management for analytics story. It's broken into a number of different component parts. I guess there's a couple of key bits that really we think is quite fundamental to making that data management capability, whether it's for analytics or anything else, and really usable, scalable, but also doing things in the right way, given all the challenges we talked about earlier. We have this thing in the middle called Claire, and that's our AI and machine learning engine, which we built into our technology. So that's really about giving people insights they didn't have before, doing things for them so they don't have to, managing the scale and complexity of data, that all organizations are really struggling with. And then there's a whole series of different capabilities that sit on top of that. Now, it will vary by what organizations are trying to do and how they're trying to do it. But, let's have a little bit of a deeper look at some of those capabilities. And actually...
Yeah, so Andy, just a quick question on that.
Yeah, I knew you were going to do that.
Just in terms of, before you go into the detail, for the people that are on the call, do you really need all of this technology to drive analytics?
Yeah, do you know what? That's actually a really good question, and I get asked that question a lot. I would argue over a period of time, if you want to use your analytics to help drive your digital transformation, you will probably need a great deal of these. What the final combination would be will vary by the type of problems you've got, the type of solutions you're looking for. But many of these things are actually things that organizations actually already do. They maybe do them manually, or they have siloed tools for doing them, or homegrown tools. So in many cases, we're not necessarily saying do anything that you're not already doing. It's probably just a better way of doing it and a more integrated, streamlined way of doing it. But yeah, fair question.
Okay, thank you.
Fair question. For me, actually, this idea that you were talking about earlier, Mel, about kind of getting the analytics and the data management in the middle. For me, I just think about this from a capabilities viewpoint and think about, so what capabilities does the business need to answer their questions, whatever questions is that they're trying to deal with. If we kind of work from the end and work our way backwards, I think probably one of the first capabilities we need to think about is something we call enterprise data preparation. So if you're going to be doing those analytics, and particularly if you're going to be doing data science for advanced analytics, then actually you probably need to think about how you're going to prepare that data to be used and consumed by the analytical platform. And now for most organizations, they do this anyway. The question then becomes is, potentially, is there a better, more consistent, more scalable way of doing this? And I think we would argue the answer is yes. So part of this is about doing the things that all organizations have already done, but also using technology to help build up a more complete picture of the data landscape, how it's going to be used, how it fits into the organization, to really not just speed up the process of preparing that data, but also making it consistent and also making it auditable and also traceable.
So Andy, that's quite a nice way of illustrating the data preparation cycle there. My question is, do these have to be done in this sequence?
Do you know what? That's a really, really important question. One of the things I think I would argue is that, remember we talked earlier about organizations being very much focused on the output, and that the need for data management actually is about giving that output the right data to be able to make the right decisions. Over time, I think organizations will be doing this, whether they use technology or not, whether they do it manually, whether they have homegrown tools. They're kind of doing all of these things anyway. Now, as we get into this modern world where we have more data, we have all that complexity, and we need automation, and we want to be operationally efficient, there's much better ways of doing that. And that's what this, I think, is really saying. There's a much better, more consistent way of doing that. And so what is the upside? Well, I'll get better data. If I get better data, then hopefully I'll get better analytical insights, which will give me better decisions off the back of it. Then there's a straight line cause and effect, I think, that comes through that. So it's really about tying some of these things together, so that when we're going to give these tools to, for example, a data science team, they have all the data context and the insights they need to be able to make the right use of that data, so it gives them the right insights. So I don't think it's necessarily a case of doing all of them. They're probably already being done. It's really about joining it together and making it an end-to-end process for people.
Okay.
But a really good observation, thanks. And the other thing, just kind of talking a little bit like that on that front, is the other thing I've also noticed is actually when you're doing data preparation, what's the world's most famous data preparation tool? It's Microsoft Excel, right? Everybody knows how to use Excel pretty much.
Yeah.
So can we apply the same kind of idea, the same style and sort of thought process that we have with Excel, but to enterprise level data with potentially huge amounts of data and huge amounts of complexity? So when we talk about data preparation, it's about taking the familiar, which is Excel, and applying it to an enterprise data problem. And you kind of get some upsides to that. Simple things, as you can see on the slide, it kind of looks and feels like Excel, but we can apply this to kind of any amount of data we like across any kind of set of systems. We have functions in there, but the important thing being is we can make it repeatable. So if we're going to start to build in a preparation series of activities, we build it into something we call a recipe, because then once you've got a recipe, you can repeat it. Okay, so it gives you auditability, it gives you repeatability. That's how you start to get operational efficient out of all of those capabilities being put together in the end-to-end world. So data preparation, I think, was probably the first one. Again, working from the end, working backwards. I think next after that is really then the concept of a data catalog. Now, when I meet many people who work in the analytics world, kind of one of their big challenges is blimey, where is all the data? For most organizations, there's lots and lots of data in lots of places, and not many organizations actually know what data they've got, or where it is, or what it means. So a data catalog is a really useful technology. From an architectural viewpoint, it supports analytics, but it also supports things like regulation and compliance, operational efficiency, change. But it gives you a good understanding of your data landscape. So now when you want to come to use some data, you actually understand what the data actually is, and what it means, and where it comes from. So are you getting it from the right place? The things that you're looking at, does it actually mean what you think it means? So the data catalog, I think, would be a really important capability to really accelerate this and, of course, industrialize it too. But having all of that data, you then got to flip and say, well, having the data is no good unless you can find it. So again, we took the idea of Excel for data preparation. The idea from a data catalog is from a search engine. So you've got a box that says, okay, just tell me what it is you're looking for. You just type it in a box like you would with any other search engine. So the idea here is that we've got all the power of all this technology, but it's surfaced up in the results manner that you get from a traditional search engine. It's about making it simple, making it relevant. So again, that's kind of what the technology is doing for you. That's how we get value out of it, because it's joined up and it's end-to-end, as you were talking about earlier, Mel. But we've also got to think about making this operational as well. So we need to be practical and tangible with all of this too. And this is just to give you an example. So we picked a big data deployment here, and it's an on-premise one. It could be lots of other technologies and not necessarily on-premise, but obviously just to give a bit of an example. So the idea behind all of this is that the traditional decisions we made about technology, whether it's a particular Hadoop distribution, okay, we're still making some of these decisions, but actually the issue that we're thinking about now is not just about getting data onto a platform, which many organizations have been doing, particularly around the data lake. It's about, I need to make sure I've got the right data on the platform. I need to understand what that data is and be able to use it and be able to manage scale and complexity. So the world of something as simple as big data has now gotten more complex, because it's about how we drive value out of that data. So simple things like having design flows that are consistent regardless as to what the technology distribution you have, how it's physically going to work, what it looks like technically, and also about making that scale. That's become really important for organizations. So if they need to scale up and scale down, they can do that. They want one set of capabilities they can deploy regardless as to what the technology infrastructure looks like. So the operational side of it has to be as flexible, and again, it's a really important part of that end-to-end journey we were just talking about. One of my favorite topics, data quality, actually really, really important for organizations to get the value out of data. So automating as much of the data quality as possible, I think, really, really important. And the reason being is most organizations recognize the need for it. They find it hard, therefore tend not to do as much as they probably would like and maybe ought to. So automating it means that we can start to remediate some of those issues and hopefully drive up the level of quality across the organization.
It's a really good point, Andy. I think in terms of data quality management, this is quite key, especially for a lot of customers that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
We did talk about it briefly when we went into the data governance.
We did, yeah.
Webinar, the roundtable event, and we had quite a lot of useful examples there. But just for the people that haven't perhaps seen that, I'm just quite interested in, who do you think should be doing these data quality rules when we've got that sort of automation at play, and who would maintain them over a period of time?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I think there's a couple of parts to the answer. So who are the best people to define what data quality means? That's probably the people who work with the data day in, day out, and that's probably people who we typically say sit in the business. Are they people who design and understand building data quality rules? Almost certainly not. So we've had a bit of a disconnect there.
Okay.
So part of this then says, who defines this? Well, really, that needs to sit in the business. And what we need to do is we need to let them define data quality rules in a way that makes sense to them, which is probably written in human readable form, not some technology speak. So that's kind of the first part of the answer. Second part then says, how do I take that, and whatever that description is, how do I automate the process of creating the technical rules that I'm physically going to deploy in my data quality. So that then becomes the provenance of technology and the delivery team. And then the third part of that then says, but actually, if I have a quality rule, let's pick something as simple as a date quality rule. The business might define it, and it might be that I've got 1,000 places where I need to apply this rule. Most organizations wouldn't apply it in 1,000 places. It's just too hard. So actually, if we can use technology to deploy that to the 1,000 places, fantastic. Can I then get things like profiling back from 1,000 places back to the business? Yeah, I can, even better. And then when the business comes, actually, no, we want to change or update that rule, I've got one place where I can then do a deployment to this 1,000 places of a change. So actually, data quality has fundamentally changed now in the fact that it's gone from being very focused on an IT delivery. It's now very much focused on the business defining, IT managing the technical infrastructure, and the technology managing the deployment to make it scalable.
Okay, so in terms of that data management culture and organisation, we're seeing a much more push into more self-service and
absolutely
sort of hybrid role.
Yeah, so absolutely self-service. But remember, earlier we talked about being operationally efficient as well. Yep. So this helps that, and of course now with having quality rules in all the right places and being able to understand things like profiling, it really puts us in a much better position to know organisationally what data we've got that's really good and where we need to go and apply some fixes if it's not that good.
Okay, perfect.
We can't forget about data protection because obviously we live in a GDPR world now. So data protection is obviously really, really important. Whether you look at this from a different dimension of being a privacy person or a data person or a data consuming person, actually there's lots of information that's really, really important. And sometimes it's really simple things like just understanding what personal data we've got and where it is. Sometimes we don't even necessarily know that data might be personal. So a classic one would be putting someone's date of birth in a free text field. It happens a lot. So unless you're looking for date of birth in a free text field, how do you know that you're not necessarily stumbling into some personal data? And therefore the personal data policy for an organization would apply to that. So actually using some of the technology that we've already talked about to give us some insights that says actually in this free text field, there is some personal or some sensitive personal information, being able to do things like classification of data, whether it be restricted or whatever the classification policy happens to be, and then understanding how then we feed that back to people. That then says that if we're going to be doing, I don't know, a new campaign from a marketing viewpoint around customer retention, then actually we know that we've got the right data to be doing that, and actually it's the data that we can and should be using, as opposed to we think it might be the right data and we might be able to use it, but we're not sure. In a GDPR world, I don't think any organization wants to be that unsure about the use of data. And then on top of that, of course, we're starting to build in a lot more capability now that says not only just going to discover things, but then like, well, how do we start to use it? And that's spotting patterns and change. So things that inadvertently happen in organizations, a system goes down one night and suddenly somebody manually reconfigures a link and suddenly your data is now going to a place it shouldn't have gone to. How do you spot that quickly and prevent the kind of business issues that come with that? So privacy is a potentially complex area, but actually being able to generate insights out of data and give that then to the analytics teams gives them confidence they're using the right data for the right purpose. And then we can also do things like protection as well. If they're not supposed to see it, but actually we can do things like mask it to make sure they don't get to see the stuff they shouldn't. But again, it's that technology and it's the architecture that underpins all of this in an end-to-end way that starts to give confidence to teams that they're using the right data for the right purposes. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on briefly then is on knowledge collaboration. We talked a little bit about collaboration back on webinar 1, but that's this idea of getting people involved in the use of data and the management and upkeep of data, as we talked about data care earlier. Whether it be from the business or whether it's from IT, everyone contributes, but we've got to give people the right tools. We've got to give them the information and the insights they need in their way that's relevant for them. We need to show change and show impact, and we need to make it easy for people. So some of the things that we've talked about, getting the technology to do the work, taking ideas from other places such as Excel and search engines. It's about making the technology decision that sits underneath all of this in an end-to-end way valuable to people, making the use of the data in a relevant way for them. And they talk about then something about the idea of managing change. For many organizations, change is such a massive issue. So then how do you spot problems before they happen? Again, it's one of the benefits you get out of end-to-end architecture. And then the last piece, which is really just a lead on to that then, I would argue that in this end-to-end world of data management we've talked about, understanding impact. And then the idea of that is really to say, let's get ahead of the game. So if we're going to make changes, which all organizations do, let's understand upstream and downstream impact, because when we do that, we can manage change rather than have change managers.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point in Andy around the butterfly effect and being able to really sort of grow that and then exploit it to a certain extent. But my question to you is, working directly with some clients of mine, would be all around the fact that, well, it's all very well and good, but do I need all the capabilities at the same time in order to make this happen? Yeah. Or is there a different way that we can actually deliver this?
I think if you want to get the optimal value from this, then you're going to have to think about how you get all of these capabilities in place. Because as you can see, hopefully, they kind of build together to give you the end-to-end view. But most organizations are not a greenfield, they're a brownfield site. So how do you start to kind of build all of these capabilities in? So the way we tend to look at this is to say, there's a couple of key things you can think of. Like the story we told this morning, you can kind of start from the end and work backwards. Sometimes that's the easy way to kind of get an organization to understand this is what we're trying to do. So if you can do the data prep for people, and then people kind of go, the quality of data is not so good, it opens the door to have a quality conversation. The other aspect of that is to say, well, maybe rather than kind of taking a big problem, let's maybe take a small problem. And we talk about this idea of start small, think big, scale fast. And the idea of start small is pick a problem and go apply the right set of capabilities to solve that problem. And then when you've done that, you can demonstrate that these capabilities work, that the problem's been solved, it's driving value, and it kind of gives you the green light and hopefully the funding to go on to the next set. So you can build the capabilities out as you look at various use cases that you're going to solve the problems against. So there's a couple of different techniques that organizations use, but do they have to start with all of this? No, they don't.
Great, thank you.
So I guess, and just kind of picking up on exactly that point, what capabilities does the business need to answer their questions? Well, actually, I think it's an integrated set of capabilities. I think that's probably number one thing. And it's about giving people the right information at the right time. Really, really important. And that's really what this story's all been about. So having the right architecture to underpin this isn't just about having the technology in place. It's about having the right technology, doing the right things in the right way. Why? This has to directly support the data strategy. Because if it's not supporting the data strategy, then we're misaligned in terms of what the technology would deliver versus what the business needs. And then the data strategy then, I think, then aligns to the business model that says this is what we actually need to use the data for. So we should have line of sight, hopefully, between the business model down through the strategy, through down into the architecture and technology, to understand how that technology architecture layer really supports the ultimate need of the business, which is in the business model. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Cool. So we've gone through quite a lot and quite quickly there, but this was really just to kind of give a little bit of a sense of some of the thought processes and the ideas that are around, an end-to-end architecture helps deliver for an organization. I guess really just as we're coming towards the end of the time slot now, just to really summarize a couple of key points. I think for me, the idea of having a set of capabilities, I think becomes really important. Again, I think we've touched on, you don't need to have all of them in place right now, but actually over time, it probably makes sense, and many organizations have probably got this or doing some of it anyway. But it's about putting it together in the right way and making sure it's aligned to the strategy and the business model, because if we're not, then we're just not going to be delivering the value that the business is going to be expecting from any investments of time, effort, or money we're making to actually make this happen. And I think also about this notion of we're changing away from being a world where process drives data. If we are going to really succeed in a world where data is driving process, then we need to think about how we manage data in this new way. So this idea of the data management culture, where we're thinking about the data care and data maintenance and embedding this in the business, once that starts to become second nature, then actually that's when the value of data really becomes exponential, because then the organization has high expectations and the data team and the data capabilities can meet and match those expectations. So I think a really important step moving forward. And throughout the whole of the webinar series, we've kind of talked about numbers of different capabilities and some technologies and some impacts and how things are linked together. I think one of the key points I think you asked there, questions about kind of where do people need to start and do they need everything. I think actually probably for me, the start point for all of this would be, let's not just kind of jump in and buy some technology. we could do that. I mean, the question being is, what value is it going to add? If I can't understand how that connects to the data strategy and how that connects to the business model, it's really hard for an organization to say this technology supports the change that we need. So understanding that linkage, I think, is really important, because that gives us a context then for everything we do, and any decisions we make or any investments we make is then seen in a way that says we understand that that investment or decision is supporting the business need and the business goal, and those two are directly aligned. So I think that becomes a much more important part of this. And data management culture is about embedding a lot of those good ideas and good practices, as well as the technology and architecture, into a business. So we've gone through quite a lot this morning. We've had some questions come in. So for those who've asked the questions, thanks very much. We've just got a few minutes, Mel, for a few questions.
Sure.
So I guess one of the things I just wanted to kind of pick up on all of this is that one of the questions that I thought was kind of interesting was about the capability model that you put together. And the word lineage came up a number of times. So on it, you have like data lineage, which kind of sat at the top level, and there was metadata lineage in the middle. Can you just explain what you mean? Because the lineage has cropped up in different places. Just explain what you mean by data lineage and metadata lineage.
Sure. Well, from my perspective, really the data lineage is all about that audit trail. It's about understanding what data you're using, for what context, where you've got it from, what you intend to use, what kind of classification of the data that you're actually using. For me, the metadata lineage is really that sort of granular level. It's about the enrichedness of what that data and data set is trying to tell you. So it's all the characteristics that surround that data and how we piece those pieces together and how it filters across enterprise. So it's more at that sort of catalogue level of how you want to trace how that data is used and proliferated across multiple areas. So one is more that summary view, and the other one's more that sort of technical view.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Another question I've got for you here is, and this is right up your street, I think, can we go ahead with all this if we haven't fully defined our data strategy yet?
Oh, interesting one, Andy. Well, I think it's one of those things that you have to think about in parallel, don't you? You touched on it before around the brown sites and how lots of organisations will already be doing some of this. Legacy platforms trying to leverage opportunities out of it, but at the same time, we have to think about how we want to use the data. So that doesn't stop us from protecting the data or having governance in place, etc. So we still need to crack on and get that done. But at the same time, if we can then sort of see the wood for the trees, if you like, around the data that we have left, how are we using that to drive insights, and actually does it help us question what data we should have in order to suffice those new business models, competitive advantage around what is it we're trying to achieve, and then customizing our data strategy to fit. So I think it's a two-pronged approach, to be honest. Okay,
it's interesting. Actually, there's another question here which is slightly related to that, which says, does all of this apply to AI and machine learning projects too? I'm guessing the answer would be yes, but I'll let you answer. Also, if so, is there any difference in requirements compared to reporting and BI?
Interesting one. Again, it's about a chicken and egg, isn't it? Because clearly your AI and ML, your machine learning projects, are going to be looking at how we use the knowledge and the harness in the business to drive that forward. So it's picking up on those privacy by design, for example, and really bringing that back into your data processes. So I would say that the requirements are there, but they're done from the ground up. In terms of the reporting that sits across that, it's really just how we build in that automation and make sure that we're capitalising and reusing those rules and making sure that we're not having to do the same thing each time we want to deliver an analytics project or what have you, because it's already embedded in the data that sits beneath it.
Yeah, and I guess part of that's also a skills thing too. I guess, AI machine learning is normally, I guess, done by a data science team. BI reporting, being self-service these days, could be done by non-technical people. I guess it's the right at the right time.
Exactly, and perhaps just thinking about the data organisation itself, we've touched upon that before in our last webinar, around how you actually set up your data governance and data operations functions to work and collaborate together, so that ultimately they're picking up on the right aspects to get the right information at the right time.
Okay, that makes sense. And we've got time for one last question. So you talked about a data, in fact, we both talked a little bit about a data catalogue earlier.
Yes.
Question was, would we only use a data catalogue for analytics, or can we use it for other purposes as well?
it's really for everything, isn't it? It's whatever of those data catalogues and data sets, raw data sets. It's really that huge repository that looks at how you discover what information you've got across the enterprise, whether it be pre-established reporting or whether it be databases or Excel spreadsheets that you alluded to. It's really about the asset. So that's what we're trying to catalogue here and classify, is what kind of data assets do we have as opposed to its fundamental use.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time this morning. Hopefully.
Thank you, Andy.
No worries. And to everybody who's been listening, thank you very much. Hopefully you found this useful. Just as a way of follow-up, just to let you know, we're actually running a roundtable event in London on Tuesday, the 12th of November. So we'll be picking up some of the topics and the conversations, but obviously going into a little bit more detail. You can find details on registration, etc., from the Agile Solutions website, or we can get the details to you after the event. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you found this useful, and hopefully we'll get to see you at the roundtable event. Thank you very much.
Thank you.